Welcome to the Dead Harvey podcast. Today we have with us makeup, prosthetics, and animatronics designer Paul Jones. I was telling Paul, I was like, Paul, I might nerd out on you a little bit because I've been a big fan of makeup effects in movies for a long time. And Paul has worked on several of the movies that I grew up watching. Go to his IMDb, it is insane. Paul, it is awesome to have you with us. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
I guess like what you're getting kind of a lot of heat for right now, in a good way, heat in a good way, is what we do in the shadows. Of course, in your past ones, this brings up on IMDb Resident Evil, Ginger Snap, Silent Hill movies. I restarted the 2006 version of Silent Hill yesterday watching it. Such a great, creepy atmosphere in that movie. Like when you're playing the video games, like all the fog, it totally brings you back into that.
Yeah, my interview for that with Christoph, I literally it's the only video game I've actually finished. I'm not a
Mhm.
huge gamer. I kind
Yeah,
of dip my toe there every now and again, but I kind of met him when in his office. We spent the entire interview talking about the video game and different cheats.
yeah.
Never once spoke about his movie. We never once spoke about what the prosthetics were. We just talked about the game. And then after about half an hour, the producer ducked his head in. He goes, "How's it going?" He goes, "Oh, great. No, he's hired." He never
Yeah.
actually talked about the work. It was just the video.
Yeah.
Because
Oh, yeah.
I think and it comes across in the movie, especially with Christoph, how much love he has for that particular game.
Mhm.
And I think that was just my enthusiasm coming through and we just clicked. But yeah.
Yeah. And those video games especially are notorious for just scaring the crap out of people. Like I remember playing those games and I would just be sort of like petrified. It's really cool when video games can do that. I remember the experience of like that liquor dog from Resident Evil jumping down from the ceiling at me, freaking me out. There are several of these seminal moments in video games, and when they translate to movie versions of them, that's impressive. Look at some of these other movies you've done. Poor Things, What We Do in the Shadows, of course. We just talked about that. Asteroid City, Beau is Afraid. I mean, it's going to take too long to go through all these. Spiral, The Boys. Of course, you did like Bride of Chucky, several TV shows, including Orphan Black. It just goes on and on and on. It's impressive. When we were talking, like especially Waxwork, because I went back and I started rewatching some of the movies that you worked on. I went through like the old school Silent Hill. I went through Waxwork. I rewatched Hellraiser 3, of course. I've seen that one several times. Um, I got some good questions for you about that a little bit later. But how did you get your start? What was the movie that was your first like big break, basically?
Well, I mean, I just did this as a hobby, right? As you'll hear that from every effects guy, especially from like the 70s and 80s. Like they just did it for fun. It was never going to be a career choice. It was just their hobby. And now it's still my hobby. I just get paid for it now.
Yeah.
So I just had amassed a selection of photos and sent them to a guy who knew a guy. Next thing you know, I'm at Shepperton Studios working for Bob Keane. Hellraiser had just come out. The irony was I hadn't even seen Hellraiser, and I was interviewing the guy that did it,
Mhm.
and he's like, "So have you seen Hellraiser?" And I literally said, what's that?" And he goes, "Oh, it's a guy with like pins in his head." And I said, "Oh, I'll check it out." Talk about like the worst interview ever, but I got the job, and the movie I was hired to come down on, it was actually he was prepping Waxwork One and what was that crazy one with Ben Cross? The
Oh, I
un
think the Nameable, is that what?
the
Right?
Unholy.
The Holy. Oh, okay,
The
okay, of
Unholy.
course,
So
yeah.
we were prepping both of
Uh-huh.
those movies at the same time. So I came down and I helped out quite a bit on waxwork, making like plants and bodies that get ripped in half by werewolves. And I was really green. Like I was making tea as much as I was doing like helping out the experienced prosthetics guys. And then all went off to go shoot those shows in the States. And I kind of went back up to Northern England. Then the next call I got was, okay, we're prepping Hellraiser 2. Come on down and lair the white worm. So those are the first two big movies that I kind of was able to contribute a lot more. And during the build for both of those films, we packed up the shop in Shepperton and moved to Pinewood, and that's where Image Animation was based for like 7 years, 7 or 8 years.
Yeah, that's awesome. And Pinewood, of course, they shot so many legendary things on, including in several of the Bond films as well, too. Is that where they've done all the Bond movies, or is that just
I believe they've done the majority of them.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. They were actually. I was there while they were shooting the first Batman movie, so I got to see the Bat set. I
Mhm.
got to see Michael Keaton in his costume walking around. The Batmobile was just sitting in a parking lot. Like now it's like so iconic, but
Yeah.
then it was just like, oh my God, I'm making a Batman movie. And it was like, it was just weird to see because it was so different to what I thought I'd ever be involved with. I thought I'd just be doing like low budget horror. Then you
Yeah.
realize, no, at Pinewood, it's everything. So yeah. Yeah, I saw Mel Gibson there, saw Clint Eastwood there. It was like Hollywood. Like, I'm from a guy who comes from a
Mhm.
very working class background who grew up in Northern England. It was like being on the moon, it was like
Yeah.
completely surreal.
Yeah. Did you ever think that like in your wildest dreams you'd be doing this for a living?
No, no, it was never my intention to do this for a career. I just thought, oh, I'm a guy up north. I have some artistic skills. I have a weird hobby, but it'll just be something I do for fun, and then I'll just go get a regular job and get married and settle down, have kids, have a normal life. And it just, I guess it's my vocation. I honestly can't think of doing anything else. Like I started when I was 18. And apart from like working in a fast food place right out of art school, I really haven't done anything else except
Mhm.
this to earn a wage in since 1987.
Wow.
It's been a while.
That's incredible. How did you, what was the movie? Was there like a certain movie that you were on? We were like, okay, now I know that I'm going to be doing this for a living. Was there a certain point that you knew I'm going to be locked into this now? I'm going to be kind of set doing this?
Yeah, Hellraiser 2 was pretty big. I went from just doing kind of painting background bodies to kind of getting, I pre-painted all the pinhead pieces. I pre-painted all the Channard pieces. I got to design the paint job on the Channard tentacle, how it comes down and grabs his head.
Mhm.
That was entirely mine. They just said, just do it however you want to do it. So at the end of that, it wasn't like, okay, go away and we'll call you if we have another job. It was like, okay, let's get some more work because we've got Paul and we've got so and so and
Mhm.
so and so and so and so. So I was at that point, I was really part of the team. So when Nightbreed came along, I was just part of the core group and then a whole bunch of new people. And that core group involved like Neil Gorton, who's gone on to win like BAFTAs galore, and Mark Coulier, who has 3 Oscars now. There was an incredible group of
Mhm.
people on Nightbreed, and they've all
Yeah.
got to like varied success, but you know, we all still kind of keep in touch. I mean, I just worked for Mark on Poor Things and Asteroid City back in the UK.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I've seen Nightbreed several times. Because that was one of kind of like those key movies growing up where I was just kind of like mesmerized by the effects in it and the prosthetic effects. And the more now, like, so how do you feel now about like with AI and everything switching to being more digital? I think as a like a prosthetics fan, I kind of I appreciate prosthetics more now that everything's kind of becoming more computerized, but sort of what's your take on do you think it like merges well, or what's your take on kind of the state of the industry with that right
Well,
now?
well, it's funny you ask because about 15 years ago, we all had all my prosthetic friends had the same conversation. Oh my God, in 10 years we won't have a job. But what we didn't realize, two things were happening was the technology in our field was improving. So the materials were becoming more like skin and they were
Mhm.
photographing more realistically. So we're able to do makeups that were able to be held in close up. Plus the fact the generation of directors that were coming in were younger and they grew up watching
Mhm.
VHS tapes and watching horror movies, but they are completely versed in in visual effects and digital. But they say, listen, we know what VFX can do, but I want practical. But the great thing about
Mhm.
now is you can give us a really great practical effect, and then we can tweak it with CG.
Yeah.
So it's very rare now that you'll see something which is entirely one thing or the other. Everything now is a hybrid effect, and that is
Mhm.
now that is discussed ahead of time. So everything we go to do, like for instance, the doll in What We Do in the Shadows, it's completely
Mhm.
practical except the mouth. But we knew that going in. It was like I can build everything except the mouth because I don't have
Mhm.
the time, I don't have the room inside the head for the servos. And they were like, okay, great, we'll just do the mouth. And then it was like done, seamless. So you're watching it and you're not really sure, is it CG? Is it
Mhm.
impractical? And that's really the perfect melding of both disciplines. And I think that's what's going to happen. Obviously, the cost of things, it gets more expensive to shoot in certain locations. So a lot of shops are kind of condensing. I myself have actually moved out of running a shop into being more freelance and actually kind of pimping myself out to other effects guys because what I wanted to do was get back into the even though on What We Do in the Shadows, I was very, very hands-on. There's very little I wasn't involved in on that show. But I felt like it would be nice just to sit at a desk and sculpt and not have to worry about the phone ringing or
Mhm.
actors coming in for live cast or anything like that. So that's kind of where I am now. But having said that, if projects come along that I find exciting, then it'll be full steam ahead again.
That's a great answer, and I agree with that too. I especially noticed that like when I was watching when we were watching the Jackson Lord of the Rings movies when that came out, and I was like, this is really cool because he's merging CGI with like all these practical effects, and it's great because when you're up close, you see the practical, and when you're farther away, you see that it's like the CGI stuff. But it was just such a great blend in that. And of course, some movies have done varying degrees of like success and then not success making that happen. But no, that's cool. And I was watching some because I'm on season one and what we're on the Shadows right now. I just started going through and watching it, but I was watching some clips of the Nadia thing, and I think it's hilarious because when she talks and it is kind of like that manipulation there when she speaks, but the rest of her is like the physical puppet, gives it more of an uncanny look, which is creepy. But then the fact that it's a comedy gives it another dimension to
Oh yeah, no, I
it.
mean it's a haunted doll. So
Yeah.
so the great thing about What We Do in the Shadows is obviously I know the genre inside and out, like a world of vampires and that's whole supernatural world. So when they say a warlock, when they
Mhm.
say a demon, when they say a werewolf, I know exactly where we're going, in what
Yeah.
direction. The difference for me is it's taking these kind of established genres and these established kind of horror aesthetics and giving them not so much making them funny, but making them in work in a comedy situation. Because
Yeah.
what we never want to do on What We Do in the Shadows, and what I don't think we've ever done, is make something look ridiculously funny.
Mhm.
It's actions and how it works in the story that makes it funny, but we're still grounded in that world of the vampires. Like the vampires themselves, when they start like doing their vampire thing, they're
Mhm.
actually quite creepy, when you
Yeah.
get reflection in their eyes, and but then the rest of the time they're just goofy idiots.
Yeah.
It's just the most wonderful show. And trust me, everybody comes away with this kind of joy, this glee
Mhm.
when they watch the show because it's so
Yeah.
ridiculously funny, especially horror goth fans.
Yeah.
But working on set, it's believe me, it's 10 times funnier because
Uh,
you get to see how we kind of make the pie, and that's the best part for me.
So do all the main actors in the show like Matt Berry and everybody else do they kind of like is it on all the time for them or are they kind of serious until it starts and then they go into the
It's
mode of it?
yeah, I mean, there's definitely been moments because the way we shoot the show is different to how they do other
Mhm.
sitcoms. Normally, other sitcoms you run through and then you film sections. So it's almost like because it's a documentary, we're filming in front of a live audience. So every single take is a master.
Mhm.
So it's like watching a stage play. Like the cameras move the audience's point of view. We don't do that with editing. So you get to see the entire scene play out from beginning to end. So what's nice is when we do have a break in the action, the characters just kind of stay in character. So I've seen Kavan, who plays Nandor,
Mhm.
in full character, like completely like rip someone's clothing apart because they thought their shorts were too short or
Mhm.
his t-shirt was too see-through, but in
Yeah.
character while they're adjusting a light or something.
Mhm.
That's really fun. I mean, I think Kavan is the one character I think who's so unlike his on-screen persona. I find the other guys, there's more of them in those characters. But yeah, it's really fun to watch them kind of switch on and switch off. And
And
to hear Matt Berry's voice is just,
oh,
it's like honey in your ears every day.
he's fantastic. It's just like the dry humor of that show, and there's something sort of magical about that show, where the comedic timing and the actors that are selected, the effects, everything just comes together perfectly. But I think that's true. He said that's what kind of makes it unique is the fact that it would be completely horrifying if they weren't so goofy. Yeah,
Yes.
because they're essentially mass murderers. There's if
Oh,
there was a
oh yeah.
documentary about them with not being recorded what they said or any of their comedic moments, it would terrify everyone. But
It,
yeah,
it it really would. I think the skill of hypnotism has saved them countless times on this show
right.
because without that they'd just be locked up in some jail somewhere.
That's great. So now when you were talking about starting your own effects studio, how did you make that transition? Like, how did you feel comfortable enough to start your own special? And what are the ducks that you have to get in a row before you start your own special effects
Oh,
studio?
I was completely unprepared and completely naive. It was out of necessity because what had happened is working for Image Animation had sent me to Toronto. And I worked there 3 shows in a row, one after another, all unconnected. They just all happened to shoot in Toronto. And on the third show, I fell in love and got married. And it was, she didn't want to move to England. So I was like, okay, I'll move to Canada. And that was literally it. I got off the plane, landed
Mm-hmm.
in town. I kind
Mm-hmm.
of had a few friends from working here, but I didn't really know the town. And I kind of looked around for work because I was always working for somebody else. So I started asking around. There really was only one guy in town at the time, and his name was Gordon Smith. And he did, the X-Men movies and Jacob's Ladder and all these great films. But Gord was older than me. He's got a good 10, 15 years on me. And he was already kind of moving, I wouldn't say out of the industry, but he was kind of changing his kind of outlook. And I met him, and he was obviously looking for somebody else because I was more of a kind of a Fangoria guy, and he doesn't really
Mm-hmm.
hire those kind of guys.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought to myself, oh my God, I'm gonna have to get my own work. There's no one to hire me. And just so happens that my wife at the time had a connection and had an interview, and that was FX the series. And that was my first show. So not only do I go from being newly married in a new country, I literally start my own business doing a show that as the designer and supervisor, which I'd technically never done entirely by myself. I supervised for Image Animation, but never to that extent. So if I had had the option to work for somebody else, like Gord or somebody like that, I probably would have done that, and my career might have taken a different turn. But it turns out that it was a ignorance, and I think ignorance is bliss, I think. And I just jumped in with both feet. And because I had the skills to do the work, I figured I had the skills to run the business. And it turns out that's an acquired skill. And it took me a long time to acquire it. But what always grounded me was I was able to sculpt, paint, do animatronics, do
Mm-hmm.
makeup. So there wasn't anything about the actual physical work that I found daunting. It was just the day-to-day minutia. And I had some success. I think the thing that I try and rely on over and over again on every job is just to keep pinching myself that I'm allowed to make monsters for a living, because it really is a privileged situation. If Dick Smith, rest in peace, was a big proponent of, if you're going to do this for a living, take it seriously, but love it, because
Mm-hmm.
it is a wonderful career to have. But remember, it is a serious business. You can't step in and out. Have discipline and have some respect for the art. And that's something I always try and impart on people that work for me is, don't use this as a stepping stone. It's too important. If
Mm-hmm.
this is what you want to do, you should do it. And it's funny. I bump into directors all the time, especially directors, a couple of producers who, when they were teenagers, wanted to do prosthetic makeup.
Mm-hmm.
I just worked with a guy in a movie, and the first thing he said was, "Yeah, I actually, when I was 11 years old, I had a portfolio full of masks and monster makeup.
Mm-hmm.
This is what I wanted to do, but I wasn't good enough, and I realized that, so I kind of changed track and became a director instead. But funnily enough, I only ever do movies with prosthetics in, because
Yeah.
that's my first love. It's kind of funny.
Yeah. I always kind of like thought that like I was kind of like isolated or nerd because I grew up watching Fangora and or reading Fangora. And and I saw the movie Summer School. And this is like a mainstream comedy. Two guys in the movie, Dean Cameron, I can't remember with Chainsaw and Dave.
Yeah.
And they were totally fascinated by Rick Baker and the effects in American Werewolf in London. And for their school paper, they had that whole speech about like who they admire most. And I thought that was great. I was like, this is finally like a mainstream movie that is going to have a mainstream audience appreciate like what all us nerds appreciate. So I thought that was really cool. But yeah, I think there's a lot of directors, like you said, that have, and I think it's awesome too. I love it when they go back and like when they get their first chance to do something indie, or they get their first shot and they decide to do practical stuff. And it's just, I think that's just much more rewarding from an audience perspective when you watch that, especially when you've grown up watching all these movies and liking them.
Well, I think as well, especially with indie films, you get a lot of bang for your buck
Yeah.
with practical films. I'm good friends with a guy named Steve Kostansky. He actually
Oh,
was actually Steve's. He's an effects guy in town. I've known him for years, but he actually
Manborg.
applied. Yeah, he actually applied the goat guy, which is in What We Do in the Shadows.
Oh,
He
no
was my
kidding.
makeup
Yeah.
artist that day because when he's not being this incredible auteur and he's like
Yeah.
changing the world with his crazy movies, he actually is still a union makeup artist. So
Oh, no
he
kidding. That's
came out
awesome.
for a few days and got to play with us on this on the show,
Oh, that's
doing the
great.
hybrid animals for last season of Shadows.
Yeah, I love Psycho Gorman. I also love The Void. The Void is super cool.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
he like you say, he knows the genre inside and out, and he gets the most out of very little. I
Hmm.
mean, he's worked miracles. But he's a talented guy, and that's what talented guys do. They work magic.
And you can tell too, the guys that are really into it because they love it.
Yeah.
Um,
Well,
yeah.
that's what I try and keep.
Hmm.
I'm still that 13-year-old kid in his
Hmm.
bedroom making monster masks. I don't think I'll ever not be that guy. I get the same joy when I open a mold for the first time and pull the
Hmm.
foam or silicon skin out for the first time and look at it that I did when I was making bits back in my bedroom when I was in high school.
Yeah.
It's the same feeling because we're kind of magicians. We're making these things to fool people, so when it works you get that kind of thrill that you've created some magic,
Yeah.
some rubber magic. And I think even with the technology changes and the way the industry is heading, I think there's still enough people that appreciate what we do, that I think we'll be seeing prosthetics in movies for years to come. I really do.
Yeah, absolutely. I certainly hope so. And I like a lot of the people that I talk to, they say the same thing. And it's just and that prosthetic stuff continues to and always get so much more attention, especially because it's like since when CGI started, we weren't seeing as much of it. We're like, bring the prosthetics back. I want to see more of the because like when as an audience member, when you watch that, that like you're just watching that being like, okay, how much time did they spend? Oh, I'll segue this into another question. Putting this makeup on Freddy Krueger or putting this makeup on Pinhead. Like you can tell there's just hours and you hear the stories like 8 hours in the makeup chair or whatnot. And there was like a lot of time and sweat and love that went into that. So it's just you feel that when you're an audience member and you watch that. You feel that come across on the screen.
You
So
do, and even with I've seen some digital work that I almost felt like I could touch it.
mhm,
But I think deep in my brain, especially with the background I have, I could tell that there wasn't anything really there. So
yeah.
I think having something practical kind of mixed in there allows the audience to it makes it tangible for the audience. It makes it it makes it real subconsciously. So they can forget about the actual effect itself and
Mhm,
just focus on the story, because that's really the bottom line. If you're not believing the characters, what peril they're in, or what's going on in the story and where they're going, no amount of prosthetic rubber or digital pixels is going to change anything. It's got to be a good story, and it's got to be something that the audience is engaged in. So I think from a practical point of view, it's always nice to keep some of it real.
yeah, absolutely. And how long did it take to put all the how many pins does it take? Oh, wait, how many pins are in Pinhead's head? And how much time does
Oh,
it
it's
take to
been a
put each
while
pin into
since I've
Pinhead's head?
well, it's funny because I working on Hellraiser 2, they were the same design from
Mhm,
Hellraiser 1. So they were metal. They were all
mhm,
all like little brass pins. So
yeah.
there was a base with a kind of a almost like a piece of thin wire that went between under the piece and stuck out. And then there was a brass cap that went over the top. So
Mhm,
each one had to be prepped like that. And that was one of my jobs. And I found that incredibly tedious. So Hellraiser 3 came along, and I became the designer, resculptor, and applicator of Pinhead. I was like, he was my job. That and the guy with the camera in his head. So I
nice.
said, I did the makeup once with all the brass pins, and I
Mhm,
went, this is bullshit. This is such a pain in the ass. Doug hated it. He hated the
mhm.
weight. So what I said, I'm sure we could do this with plastic ones. So I remade all the pins in plastic and just
Oh,
crazy
okay.
them onto the foam, because I know foam latex, when you put crazy glue on it, it instantly activates and it goes rigid right away. So if
Mhm.
you take a little bit of glue, stick them on. So I went from taking like an hour to prep the piece to like maybe 20 minutes.
Wow.
And they were lightweight. They lasted way longer on the face. They didn't wiggle or move. And at the end of the day, I could just pop them all off, clean the tips, stick them back on with more crazy glue. So we went from, yeah, the quickest we did the makeup on Hellraiser 3, I think was 57 minutes. That was a
Mhm.
really, really fast application because the makeup was two pieces.
Mhm.
And I think we did it 27 times for Hellraiser 3.
Mhm.
And that was, yeah, that was, in hindsight, if somebody said to me now, okay, we're going to give you an iconic makeup that is
Mhm.
famous the world over to sculpt, mold, paint, and glue on every day, and you're 21 years old,
Yeah.
I probably would have like shit my pants. Sorry.
Right.
But
Oh no,
because
you can
now
say
knowing
whatever
the
you want. Yeah.
stress you have working
Yeah.
with big shows and
Mhm.
directors and just what could actually go wrong, having
Yeah.
seen the real world, I was so naive. I was like, yeah, I'll do Pinhead, no problem. And then while I was doing it, I was like, oh, this is really, really easy because nothing went wrong. But if something had have gone wrong, I
Yeah.
probably would have fallen apart. But
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
that's the impetuous of youth, I guess.
That's kind of like what I think about when I was watching it. It's like, okay, it takes all this time to put this makeup on. There's got to be an incredible amount of tension afterwards, like if something goes wrong, or because there's got to be such limited time, after
Oh,
that.
it's a fine balance. Whenever you glue anything to someone's skin, you're trying to find the perfect balance between having it stay on all day, but
Hmm.
still be able to take it off at the end of the day. So if you stick it on too well, you can actually hurt their skin removing it.
Yeah.
If you don't stick it on well enough, then starts to come off halfway through your day, which is a nightmare because then you're constantly touching it up and chasing edges and basically following the actor around. They don't want you poking their face all day long because they've got a job to do. So not only is your job as a prosthetic makeup artist to just glue it on and make it look good, is to technically glue it on and know the actor's skin. So you usually figure that out after about the third application. So you know that you have to make it more kind of attached, sorry, around their mouths on certain days in certain situations. So you get to know the actor's skin as much as you get to know the makeup itself. So by the time I got to the end of doing Pinhead, like we got it down to an art. We could glue it on, it would stay on all day, and at the end of the day, we just a little bit of remover and it would come off. It was just the perfect balance. But you have to get the right actor for that because some actors, their skin just like sucks makeup in, and it's like
Hmm.
no, even if you glue it on with a tiny bit of glue, it's still a pain to get it off. And
Hmm.
other actors, their skin just doesn't want to stick. So
Yeah.
you're kind of having to try even harder then, you know. I've been very lucky to have done Doug Jones's makeup a few times on What We Do in the Shadows.
He's
And
the
Doug,
Baron, right? So,
he's the man. He's the man. You know, if
he's great.
I
Yeah.
I always feel if you glued a makeup on
Hmm.
Doug Jones in this industry,
Hmm.
you've made it as a makeup artist because
Yeah.
it's kind of like driving a Ferrari if you like cars, you know, it's like it really is. And but the great thing about Doug is he still to this day has the perfect prosthetic skin.
Hmm.
It takes only a little bit of glue to get the piece on. It stays on all day.
Huh.
Then at the end of the day, it comes off beautifully. He just has this perfect skin that holds glue when you need it to, and then lets go when you don't. So it's always been a pleasure gluing makeup on Doug.
His body must have adapted to it after all the makeup over these years with working with Guillermo and
I
whatnot.
guess
Yeah.
so. I guess so.
Yeah.
Maybe he's part telesis now. I don't know.
Oh, that's great. So is there a situation talking about like when things went wrong? Is there a situation where like everything went wrong and then you had to problem solve, just like pull something out of nowhere to fix a situation?
Um, Nothing really goes wrong to that degree because uh if it did, I wouldn't be where I am today.
Hmm.
You know, because what happens is you get hired based on your reputation. You don't get hired based on your resume. Somebody will always ask somebody you've worked with what they were like, what you were like to work with. So if I'd had any huge failures, it would have gotten around pretty fast. There's been times where you do a blood gag and then you go to shoot it and the blood doesn't come out.
Hmm.
We did an effect on, I think it was FX the series where um, we had mixed the blood a little bit too thick compared to the test we'd done back in the workshop. So when we went to pump the blood, it just kind of trickled out instead of sprayed out. So we thinned down the blood, pumped it back through, still trickling, thinned down the blood even more, pumped it through, it's still trickling. And what we hadn't realized is the tube leading to this chest plate was about 20 feet long. So
Hmm.
all we were doing each time we were pumping is just pumping the remaining blood that was in the tube
Hmm.
further and further out. So by the time we got to the thin down blood, which we'd thinned down too thin at this point, it just came gushing out all over this
Hmm.
room that they'd given us to kind of prep the makeup. So we literally coated the entire wall completely by accident. So then all we had to do, we were ready to go. We just cleaned up the actor a little bit, turned down the pressure slightly, went to set, and then it came out perfect. But yeah, we just forgotten there was all this thick blood still in the tube, slowly being pushed up, and it just it was yeah. So stuff happens, but
Yeah.
it's never to a point where it kind of I've never shut down a production, so to speak. That would just be that would be career death, you know.
Yeah, I was kind of like part of that was kind of like if because you always hear about there could be stuff like going wrong like it's out of your circumstances too, like if something burns down or if there's like something that causes like a physical disaster to an environment that you have to pull yourself out of, or if or if anybody like made changes or whatnot that you had to adapt to. I guess you don't have to do
Yeah.
that now with your own studio, but I guess previous to that.
Yeah, I mean, there is an approval process that you try and keep you try and keep pretty adhered to during the build. Some directors like to throw you a curveball at the
Mhm.
last minute. On what we do in the shadows, especially because the builds were quite tight, always quite tight, and they were constantly kind of modifying the script because again, it's a comedy. So they're
Mhm.
always, as Paul Sims, the showrunner, would always tell me, you have to find the funny.
Mhm.
So if people aren't laughing, it's no longer a comedy. It's just a cool looking documentary about vampires.
Right.
So they're always tweaking stuff. So sometimes some of our stuff gets kind of pushed aside. Like I remember getting halfway through a sculpture and then all of a sudden I get a rewrite and I'm like, that entire creature's no longer in the script. And I'm like,
Mhm.
oh, right. Okay, good. I don't have to finish that. But then I read a little further and it's got a whole new creature, which I now have to build in the set in the remaining time. So that is really where my decades of experience comes in. It's knowing what I can do in that time and realistically tell the producers what they can expect. Of course, I always try and undersell and overproduce, and that's always been my kind of motto on what we do in the shadows. Like like with our hybrid characters from season 5.
Mhm.
um Originally they wanted like 13 animals. And I said, I can do 13 animals, but which one are you going to focus on?
Mhm.
There's loads. So why don't we just pick like a handful, like literally 5 creatures, and then that way I can just put all my eggs in that basket. And that was nice because we had our performers in line and we had our designs done, and they actually were able to take that episode and put it at the end of the shooting blocks. So I would have a nice period of time to build. But it turns out that even then, we had one actor who was playing one of the vampires had some dental work that needed doing. So we had to switch days around, and literally a week of prep got pushed to a week of shooting instead. So I lost a whole week of the build, but we
No.
still managed to get it done because there was other things we could shoot as well. So it's sets sometimes don't get finished in time. Actors sometimes need to rejig their schedule for many reasons. So you have to be adaptable, especially in TV,
Mhm.
because you do have tight deadlines and you're shooting an episode a week basically, and there's really no time to kind of fool around. So that's why it was nice working with such a great team on that show because DP is first class, costume, you know, uh, uh, production design, props, stunts, they're all like top of their field. They just all happen to be doing this silly 20-minute comedy, which everybody
No.
loves. And I think
Yeah.
why people of my background keep coming back, with all the years of doing feature films, I'd much rather do a show like what we do in the shadows because it's why I got into this business. It's just the format itself. It's like it's monsters and it makes me laugh. What
Yeah.
else could you ask for, you know?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And so I went and I watched that episode. So yeah, everybody that is like serious, like special effects fans, go watch that episode. It's great because there's just a cornucopia. It's like a buffet of all of these like creatures in the background, like little creatures too, and everything with different faces on them that kind of like mimic the actor that Guillermo, the character that they're taken from. But it's hilarious, all these different versions of him. But that's really cool. That was a real treat to watch. And didn't Kyle Newacek directed that episode too, right?
Yeah,
The
he did.
Workaholics.
Yeah,
Props to
Kyle
Kyle. I
and
love
Yana. Yeah.
Workaholics. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. No, Kyle and Yana
Mhm,
are two directors for the show. So 10 episodes, they
mhm,
basically do five each. They just alternate. So one's prepping while one's shooting. So having the same director come into the show and having them been attached to the show, because Yana was our editor in season one. So she ended up becoming one of our directors, and Kyle's just, is just a comedy genius. So they're both so in tune with the show that it's almost like a shorthand for them now.
mhm.
No,
Yeah.
it's so seamless. So Kyle directed the hybrid animals, and we'd done a few episodes. We'd done a werewolf episode together. He directed the episode where Nadia's doll first appears. That was his episode. And he always kind of comes in, gives me a hug, and he goes, "Okay, I'm really gonna try and kill you on this episode. I've
Mhm.
tried for the last four seasons, but I'm really gonna kill you on this one." And I'm like, "Bring it on." Bring it on. And I get to set and he's like, damn it, I didn't kill you yet. It's really
That's
fun.
great.
It's really fun.
Well, yeah, it does seem like it would be a dream show to work on. Is there any effects that you have made that have freaked you out too much? And you're like, I can't have these in the room with me. I got to keep these somewhere else. I can't look at them.
I actually made not me so much because for me I have to keep it real. I'm sculpting these out of clay and I'm molding them and there's a budget involved and there's deadlines. So to me it's just art.
Mhm,
There's nothing real about this until I see it on screen.
mhm,
But um I had a terrible habit in my old workshop of putting a very realistic monster dummy
mhm,
and stand it outside the washroom door, but leaning on the door. So when one of my crew would come out, it would fall in on them.
mhm.
That was one of my little practical jokes, and I thought it was hilarious. No one else thought it was funny, but they did find it funny when they did it to me one day,
Yeah.
and I was not expecting it. So even though there was this rubber dummy that I had built,
Mhm.
it fell on me, and I screamed. I was like, ah! And it was like that was it. I never did another practical joke again.
Yeah, part of comedy is tragedy happening to someone else, right? Or
Yeah,
pain to
certainly is.
someone.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I mean, we're talking about a show where vampires kill people and you're laughing about it. So we must be doing something right. There's a certain amount of tragedy there.
Yeah, absolutely. It's cool that you mentioned FX because I just rewatched those are other movies I grew up with, like watching the Brian Brown and Brian Dennehy, the FX 1 and 2. They just put those back on HBO not that long ago. Love those movies. I got to watch the series 'cause I've never actually seen the series. Is it available anywhere to check out or?
I found it on a few places. I have the Blu-ray. It's yeah, I mean the first FX, like I grew up watching that. That was
Mhm.
one of those kind of touchstone movies for us because it was about an effects guy. So every prosthetics guy watched it.
Yeah.
Um the series was I think it was well done. I think it was true to the movie. But it was a lot more lightweight. We didn't
Mhm.
really touch on any serious subjects. But for me, it was like the best first calling card
Yeah,
show
absolutely.
because
Yeah.
every week there was something different. So one week I'd build a robot, next week it'll be a fake nose, week
Mhm.
after that would be a melting face, then there would be a werewolf, and then there would be tentacles. So
Yeah.
like every episode was like a page in my portfolio.
Mhm.
So I thought that was my calling card. And I used that show for years to get a horror movie or get a comedy or whatever. I could just pull an effect from that show and show, oh, I can build that because I did this on FX. Now I say that about what we do in the shadows. Like
Mhm.
FX is kind of old news for me now. Now I can look at what we do in the shadows. And if I went for an interview, they say, have you built a fake body? I certainly have. It'd be episode 5, season 3. Or have you done old age makeup? Yes, I certainly have. It's like episode 4, season 2. It's like it's such a great show for me. And even though it's finished and we just shot the last season, I don't feel a sense of loss because everybody on the show just gave it their all.
Hmm.
And I think even though we went into season six feeling a bit blue that it was coming to an end, I
Yeah.
really feel now the word I've been using is fulfilled,
Hmm.
because I really feel that everything they asked me to do, I busted my ass and I gave them exactly what they wanted and more. And I think that shows on screen.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to give like a nod out to another movie that I rewatched, and then I'll ask you one more question and then let you go here. Um, this was so I also rewatched Solomon Kane just a couple of days ago.
Yeah.
Fantastic, very underrated movie that does not get nearly enough love. And as a Robert E. Howard fan, if you're a fan of the Conan universe, check that movie out. That's a really cool movie with some great effects in it as well.
Yeah, the that was one of those weird little films where MJ Bassett, who had directed a couple of movies, was a big fan of Silent Hill 1.
Mhm.
So when MJ had decided that they wanted to do Solomon Kane, it was get me the crew that did Silent Hill. So Dan Lauston came on board, Patrick Tatopoulos came on board, and then they were like, "You, prosthetics guy, Paul Jones, come on, you're coming too." And I was like, "Oh, okay." So it was I felt like even though on Silent Hill 1 I was the on-set coordinator and I built a lot of the stuff, I really felt that that was more Patrick's show than it was mine. But to be part of Solomon Kane, it is one of those movies that people haven't seen. I was just talking to my future brother-in-law, and he was like, "We're going to sit down over beers, and you're going to tell me all about
Hmm.
Solomon Kane one day because I love that movie,
Yeah,
and nobody I
absolutely.
know has seen it." And I'm like, "Right? Nobody's seen it. It's like the most gritty, realistic, kind of medieval fantasy movie that nobody's seen."
Yeah. So
It's bizarre.
I always like to recommend that movie and give that movie some love. And I wish that's what I hope if they do another Conan movie, it's similar in that vein. Because I think that movie, just the whole tone of that movie and how much it kind of emulates the Robert E. Howard books is just great. And I love to see more in that universe or more if they do more Conan movies similar to that. I
You
feel like
never
that.
know, right? You, you
Yeah.
you never know. I think it's just one of those films that people might come back to, and it
Yeah.
might pick up momentum sometime in the future because you've got a new Lord of the Rings series, you've got a
Yeah.
new Game of Thrones series, like hobbits and elves and dragons and all that kind of stuff. The fantasy's never going to die, and I think if you were to do a Solomon Kane series, I think it would go down really well. Unfortunately, Witcher has kind of covered a lot of that ground,
Yeah.
but it's kind of different. I
Yeah,
think Solomon
absolutely. Yeah.
Kane is a standalone, and it has such a wealth of stories to choose from like Howard. I think somebody would be smart to like at least try and develop it. I think it'll be really
Yeah,
worthwhile.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So everybody check that out. It's on Amazon Prime right now just to watch it. Fantastic movie. Anyways, so last question here. Just what advice do you give to people that are those nerds checking out movies that love practical effects and want to get into the industry? What's your words of like encouragement or advice for them?
Just love it. Like think of it, don't think of it as a career path. Think of it as just a hobby, just something you want to just like Eric Clapton used to say, how did you get so good with the guitar, Eric? And he goes, I would play until I fall asleep with the guitar on my lap. Then I would wake up with it on my lap and I would start playing again. Prosthetics or any kind of movie discipline is kind of like that. Just immerse yourself in the world and know that you're privileged to do it and just never lose that sense of wonder and that sense of kind of experimentation, especially with indie movies and low budget stuff. You can do so much with so little, and once you start being creative, your juices start flowing. There's really no end to what you can accomplish.
Yeah. Oh, well said. Very well said. Well, Paul, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, and now I got to go and watch some more of your stuff.
Please
Uh,
do. Yeah, enjoy.